collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, Cyprus prepares to open its airports and hotels.
If we manage to attract tourists and do it in a manageable way so that we keep the health profile of the island very, very high at the moment, I think that's the recipe for success.
And the 2-metre social distancing may not be enough, especially if conditions are windy.
When you have wind, the droplet cloud will be transmitted beyond 2 meters, and depending on the environmental conditions, this can be a considerable distance beyond the 2-meter recommended distance.
We're into phase 2 of the lifting of the restrictions we've been under during the coronavirus lockdown. And the next thing that we expect to happen is for the airports and the hotels to open. Joining us to explain how that's going to happen is the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Savvas Perdios. Savvas, first of all, it's obviously a very difficult balancing act that the Tourism Ministry is having to do. What are the main concerns that you have to take into consideration as you start opening up the hotels?
Hi, Rosie. It's great to be with you. Obviously, the million-dollar question is getting the right balance between not opening too early, but at the same time, not opening too late. Because, as you can imagine, health and the safety of our people and of visitors to Cyprus is the most important priority for us. But at the same time, since things do look to be going very well both here and in some countries abroad, it is important to really get that balance right between health and the economy.
Can I just ask you, you've, I think, for the moment, declared that only certain countries will be allowed, if you like, to fly into Cyprus, and they're not our biggest tourist markets, are they? I think I saw somewhere that you said you expected, maybe if we're lucky, 30% of the usual number of tourists by the end of the year. That surely means that an awful lot of hotels are not going to have any customers. So will all the hotels open? Or will some of them just say we might as well just not bother?
I do feel that there is a possibility that some will say that they're not going to open, but we're working extremely hard to make sure that even for the remainder of the season, there is enough business for everybody. Nobody knows exactly yet how many people we will be able to welcome here. But I'd like to go back to something you were saying at the beginning. No, the intention actually is not to disallow flights from particular countries at all. We are working on a plan that will allow the majority of countries to be open to Cyprus, just with different criteria based on their epidemiological situation. And this will enable many airlines to create or to draft their schedules in advance, to plan ahead. And that's very, very important for a small country like Cyprus, which is also an island and depends on flights. So we want to give airlines the possibility to do this planning ahead.
But only from certain incoming countries. I mean, you're not going to. Are you going to allow people from the UK or Russia to fly in willy-nilly?
The approach that we are taking, as I said, is to divide countries into different categories. And based on the epidemiological situation in each country, that will then set the criteria for entry into the country.
Yeah, but that's my point, is that it means that because at the moment the two countries I mentioned, the UK and Russia, not doing so well on the epidemiological side, there won't initially be flights from those countries. They may come later in the autumn, perhaps.
No, maybe there will be flights. It's just people who want to come to Cyprus from these countries, they may be facing, at the beginning at least, stricter measures before entry into the country.
What are those stricter measures?
We haven't decided yet, and it's not something I can mention at the moment because these decisions are pending at the Minister's Cabinet. I think they will be announced in the next few days, as will the countries that will feature in each category.
Right, because I also read somewhere recently, and it struck me as a little worrying, that not all passengers incoming from countries where the epidemiology seems to be under control will be tested at the airport on their arrival. Why not?
This is something that actually the European Union is requesting as well. I do feel that Europe as a whole, they really feel that travel does need to restart in order to get the economies going. Cyprus is part of the EU. So I don't feel that countries which are in the same epidemiological situation, that they will be allowed to do whatever they want when it comes to border control. And it was a request from the EU not to discriminate. So if countries are at the same epidemiological level and they're doing very, very well, the suggestion of the EU is to facilitate the transport across borders as much as we can.
Fair enough, but it still seems to me odd that you wouldn't just take a swab and make sure that if somebody did test positive, they could be quarantined. It's not discriminatory if everybody does it, surely.
I haven't said that it's not going to be done on a random basis. It's something that we will be doing, no matter where the country of origin. This is something that will be done for all incoming flights. Let's say we will be getting a sample just for certain countries, depending on how they are doing epidemiologically. They might not require a test in advance. Others might require a test in advance. That's what the categorization is about. But irrespective of which of the two happens, some countries may even require quarantine. But as a matter of principle, we are going to be testing randomly upon arrival anyway.
Now, let's go back to the hoteliers. They've been through a very tough time, and they're opening up for local tourists. Do you see people in Cyprus taking up the offers that they will be giving, I suppose, or is the feeling here that maybe it's a little bit too soon to go out there and mingle with people? What's the feedback you're getting?
This is a personal opinion, and I actually feel that if some neighboring countries of Cyprus allow the free movement of Cypriots into their countries, quite a few will actually travel for holidays. So we shouldn't assume that everybody is going to spend their holidays in Cyprus, and we should also not assume that everybody is going to have a holiday. A lot of people have been out of work for the last 3 months, even though the government has supported a lot. But nevertheless, there's a bit of insecurity at the moment, financial insecurity. A portion is not going to go on holiday. Others, as I said, are going abroad. I do feel that, with the last-minute offers and attractive packages that hoteliers are going to be doing, yes, we will be able to have a higher proportion of Cypriots holidaying in Cyprus this year relative to previous years, which is more than welcome. But let's be honest, we had 40 million overnights from tourism last year, so there's no way that the domestic market is going to make up for that. It was around 6 or 7% of our overnights. Hopefully with our targeted marketing campaigns, this is something that we can increase to maybe around 10%, but it's not enough to save our season.
No, and that brings us back to the hoteliers themselves. I presume that, as with many other businesses, they've been receiving some sort of support during the main part of the lockdown. But what happens when some of them say, we've opened up for bookings and we haven't got any, so we can't open and we can't pay staff? Is there going to be more support for them, or are you going to target certain hotels to see if you can channel business certain ways? You personally, of course, can't do that as a ministry, but I'm just trying to think of the logistics of making sure that at least some hotels manage to be viable businesses this year, whereas others, quite a lot of others probably won't be.
Look, certainly, we will not be channeling business to particular hotels. That's obviously not something we can do. But a few days ago, the Ministry of Labour, they came out with another incentive scheme, especially for the tourism sector, whereby they are incentivizing employment rather than unemployment. This means that they've come up with an incentive scheme where it gives hoteliers and other tourism businesses the possibility to hire a certain amount of staff, and if they achieve a target of hiring, a percentage of hired staff, then the Ministry of Labour is subsidizing a part of their salaries. So I think this is a very good start. What we need to be focusing on now is not so much anymore on paying compensation and offering support to cover lost revenues, etc. Now, in my opinion, it's about doing whatever we can to bring in business so that as many businesses remain viable for this season. I think the government has done immense things, not only for tourism, but for many businesses, has done immense things for employees. There's only so much money in the bank. There's only so much money in our pocket. We have supported as much as we could. The whole point of the strategy was to keep businesses afloat until hopefully end of June, when the economy would beginning of June, when the economy would open again. Luckily for us, things have gone well and we opened a bit earlier. And it's the same with tourism. I mean, I've always said that we wanted tourism to start by mid-June. It looks like we're on target. And this is going to give us the opportunity to fill up the coffers. And that, for me, is the most important thing now. If we manage to attract tourists and do it in a manageable way so that we keep the health profile of the island very, very high at the moment, I think that's the recipe for success. And in all honesty, I don't think that any of the tourism businesses are in it this year to make crazy profits. Everybody's realizing what a difficult season it is. And I sense a very big amount of unity from everybody. They do want to open. They do want to employ their staff. And this season is about staying afloat, remaining in the market, not disappearing from the forefront of travelers' minds, and obviously offering employment to as many people as we can. So that's the basic principle of this season.
And the small restaurants and tavernas, they're really the most at risk, are they not? Because they probably can't survive without the customers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they're hard hit, but not the worst hard hit. There's many sectors of the tourism industry that have been hit very hard. You gave an example, but I'd like to give some more. I mean, the theme parks, they're also very tourism focused. A lot of theme parks can't even open without tourism on the island. Or rental cars, the scuba diving, the jeep safaris, all these tourism-related businesses, even the kiosks, the supermarkets, especially in the beach resort areas. You know, these are all businesses that depended heavily on tourism for their income. So, yeah, it's the whole sector. But I'm optimistic, Rosie. You know, I don't like to paint a black picture. A lot of work has gone into the whole project for the last 3 months, both on the health and safety side, but also on getting the destination ready for tourism, doing it in a safe way, and making sure that we are present. And that's what we're doing right now, making sure that travelers abroad and tour operators, airlines, they see Cyprus as a viable option for this summer.
It's going to be much more expensive, of course, for all these businesses to implement all the hygiene measures that are being required. What about that? Again, particularly with small businesses or even with huge hotels, they've got vast areas they have to keep sanitised. For how long?
That's a fair comment, but maybe it will turn out that customers this summer are willing to spend more, because this summer they're not paying for the beach, they're not paying for the sun, the sea, and all of that. This summer, a traveler is paying for health and safety. And I think the value of health and safety is high. There is a price to pay for that. And I do feel that people who choose Cyprus are going to be choosing it not because of its fantastic weather, but because it has had an exceptional record when dealing with this crisis.
The last thing I want to ask you about is cruise ships. And you were very, very upbeat about them, was it last year when we were in Limassol? And
yes.
You've said, I think, that there will be no disembarkations from cruise ships because they do seem to be a sort of hotspot when it comes to this coronavirus. What's the position there? Will cruise ships still be passing by Cyprus? Are they still in business even?
Yeah, they are in business. I have heard from some cruise liners that they will not be operating at all in 2020. But one thing that Cyprus has started doing and doing it quite well was these regional cruises. So I'm pretty hopeful that due to the fact that in the East Med, a lot of countries like Malta, Greece, obviously Israel and Lebanon, they have actually dealt with the virus very well. I have to say that there may be a possibility for some cruises to operate even this summer, maybe a little bit later in the year, focusing on the Eastern Mediterranean region. But universally, globally, yeah, I do think that cruising is a sector that is going to be hard hit by all of this. There was some negative publicity, but at the same time, cruising has the benefit of having rave fans. A lot of people who travel on cruising, they wouldn't change it for the world. So it is going to be a difficult time for them, but let's see how that pans out.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Savvas, for your time on the programme.
Rosie, thank you very, very much.
And we'll follow with interest all the things that you're trying to juggle to make sure our tourism industry comes through this, won't be unscathed, but certainly, hopefully, not badly injured. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Rosie.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Moloch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
The current advice, if you're out and about after the lockdown has been eased, is to stay a certain distance from everybody else. But is that enough? Apparently, recent research conducted in Cyprus suggests it may not be. We're joined by Professor Dimitris Trikakis, who is with the School of Sciences and Engineering at the University of Nicosia. He's been looking into the other factors that could affect how far those droplets that possibly contain the virus can travel and how long they stay in the air. So, Dimitris, can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to do this and how you went about measuring these things?
Okay, thank you very much, Rosie. There are several facts in the literature about social distancing, but these facts are based on recommendations that do not take into account the environmental conditions. The current recommendation of the 2-meter social distancing is based on the WHO that essentially considers what happens in respiratory droplets when an individual expels these droplets from the mouth or nose, and we are in an environment that there is no wind. So the 2-meter social distancing remains as the correct social distancing when the environmental conditions are such that the droplets cannot travel beyond 2 meters. However, when you have wind, the droplet cloud will be transmitted beyond 2 meters, and depending on the environmental conditions, this can be a considerable distance beyond the 2-meter recommended distance. So we thought that this is worth exploring and investigating, and we performed a very detailed study of how airborne droplet can be transmitted when you have different wind conditions. And what we found is that depending on the environmental conditions, specifically when you have wind, the droplets will travel longer distances beyond the 2 meters. And in some cases, we found that the droplets can travel considerable distance. The trajectory will be a falling trajectory because of the gravity, but still will be quite significant, the distance they will travel, so they can potentially affect another person.
How were you able to measure this?
Well, what we did is we performed, this is a fluid dynamics problem. The droplets are carried by flow, and the wind will take the cloud of the droplets and will transport it to a distance further away. So how we do it is we solve complex partial differential equations of fluid mechanics, which is one of the most difficult problems in physics and engineering physics, because it involves very complex mathematical equations, in conjunction with the droplet dynamics that describes all phenomena that take place during this droplet transport. This phenomena can be interaction between droplets, can be evaporation of droplets, and so forth. So by solving a large set of differential equations, mathematical equations, we calculated the trajectories and the position of droplets under different conditions.
Now, do other environmental conditions, I'm thinking of things like humidity or dryness of the air around what's happening, affect it?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, there are many factors that can affect the droplet transmission, and many factors are poorly understood. In fact, we have in the pipeline a study about the effects of other environmental conditions on droplet transmission. We can only speculate what is going to happen. I know there is a lot of discussion in the social media, on television, in various fora about the effect that the environmental conditions can have on droplets and on the virus. But I think there is a lot of speculation. We need further scientific evidence that we will be able to quantify these effects. One thing, if I may, I think one of the reasons that we did the study is because we wanted to raise awareness of the people, of the authorities, and just take into account that there may be some recommendations that need to be not reconsidered, but just to bear in mind when we talk about social distancing, and depending on the conditions. But of course, there are factors such as the dosage and the time of exposure to a virus that will certainly need to be further quantified. We don't know, for example, what is the virus load that somebody needs to take in order to be affected. And we don't know what is the time of exposure. These are parameters that I speculate that will be important and may influence actually the final result. Therefore, we need to consider the results of the study in the perspective that simply they add a piece to the very complex puzzle of the very complex virus transmission and associated issues.
Now, people have started going back to work in offices. The weather is warming up, and that means air conditioners will almost certainly be used in a lot, especially of our glass-fronted office blocks. A little bit, if you will, about the effect of air conditioning and indeed just fans, whether they're ceiling fans or the swinging fans. Do they have the same effect as the wind? Does it make a difference whether the windows are open or closed?
Again, these are very good questions. And if we look at the big picture, what we can say is that wherever the conditions, indoors or outdoor, are such that allow the transport of these droplets, because there is a circulation of the air, of course, there will be an effect such that the droplets will not remain within the 2-meter distance. But how the droplet will be transmitted depends very much on the local conditions. For example, what is the air conditioning speed? What is the stream, the wind within the circulation of air within the room when you have windows open or you have a fan? But the fact is that if the conditions are such that there is a wind either within the room that is artificially created, mechanically created, or outside, the droplets will not remain in the 2 meters distance.
So you're going to have to think about sanitising absolutely everywhere regularly, because we don't actually know, do we, how long these droplets, should they contain the virus, can actually survive on different types of surfaces.
There are some studies that show the survival of viruses on surfaces, but in my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, is that there is significant further research to be done in order to be able to quantify these effects. I don't think that one study that has been published, or a couple of studies, are sufficient to give us understanding, because it depends on many things. Is not only the surface, is the combination of surface and environmental conditions. Depends on the different types of surfaces. So I think it is a very multi-parametric and multifaceted problem that requires further investigation. Sanitization is something that I would personally strongly recommend, because it helps you ensure that you reduce the risk. So anything we can do to reduce the uncertainty, it would help. Of course, we cannot give advice to people how they will run their everyday life. We have to exercise judgment, and any advice we give will be advice that has to do with several other factors, like personal way of living and environmental conditions where you work, and etc., etc. So I think simply awareness is very important, because if we are aware of the risks, we can then educate ourselves and adapt ourselves to a new lifestyle that may be required for a long period of time until we find the vaccine.
Hopefully we're helping people to be educated about all these things. But one last point, and that is, we keep hearing people saying things about coughing or sneezing, but actually just simply talking, we exude droplets, do we not?
That's correct. Of course, talking, depending on the frequency and the intensity, we expel droplets. And the sneezing or the coughing simply increases the speed with which the droplets are expelled from the mouth or the nose. So talking is also something that we need to take into account. The social distance is very, very important, in my opinion, because sanitization and social distance. And we have to adhere to these recommendations for perhaps a long period of time.
Something we're all going to have to get used to, I suppose. Dimitri, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you.
That is Professor Dimitris Trikakis from the School of Sciences and Engineering at the University of Nicosia. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.